poem will now be read by Keith Donnelly of the Irish Great War Society.
To my daughter Betty, the gift of God, by Thomas Kelly. In wiser days, my darling rosebud, blown to beauty proud as was your mother's prime. In that desired, delayed, incredible time, you'll ask why I abandoned you, my own, and a dear heart that was your baby throne. To dice with death, and oh, they give you rhyme and reason. Some will call the thing sublime, and some decry it in a knowing tone. So here, while the guns curse overhead, and tired men sigh, with mud for couch and floor, know that we fools, now with the foolish dead, died not for flag, nor king, nor emperor, but for a dream born in a herdsman's shed, and for the secret scripture of the poor.
Nurses who served near the front line during the war are among the unsung heroes of that conflict. They worked long hours, doing their best to comfort wounded soldiers, often in appalling conditions, and sometimes they were the last person a serviceman saw before he died. One woman who served as a nurse during the war was Vera Britton. Born in Newcastle in 1893, Vera Britton was a well-known writer, feminist and pacifist, whose journey towards pacifism began during the Great War. After the war broke out, Vera became a nurse with the Voluntary Aid Detachment, and she served in London, Malta and France. During the war, one by one, many of the friends she cared about most were killed, including her fiancé, Roland Leighton, and in 1918, her brother Edward was killed in France. In France, some of the suffering men in her care were German prisoners of war, and here she recognized a tragic and terrible absurdity. She was working hard to save their lives, while her brother and his comrades had been trying to destroy them. As a result of these experiences, Vera now saw that there was nothing holy or just about war, and she never forgot what she learned from it. Vera Britton's fiancé, Roland Leighton, had been expected home on leave just after Christmas in 1915. Unfortunately, he died on December 23rd of wounds received during a nighttime wire inspection a day earlier. When she heard the sad news, she visited Roland's family, and this extract she wrote from a letter to her brother Edward on the 14th of January 1916 will now be read by Mary Kenny of the Irish Great War Society, and that letter describes the visit Vera Britton made to her fiancé's mother.
I arrived at a very opportune, though very awful moment. All of Ronan's things had been just sent back from the front. These were his clothes, the clothes in which he came home from the front the last time. Everything was damp and worn, and simply caked with mud. For though he had only worn the things when living, the smell of those clothes was the smell of graveyards and the dead. The mud of France which covered them was not ordinary mud. It had not the usual clean, pure smell of earth, but it was as though it were saturated with dead bodies, dead that had been dead a long, long time. All the catacombs of Rome could not make me realise mortality and decay and corruption as vividly as did the smell of those clothes. There was his cap, bent in and shapeless out of recognition, the soft cap he wore rakishly on the back of his head, with the badge coated thickly with mud. He must have fallen on top of it, or perhaps one of the people who fetched him in trampled on it. We discovered that the bullet was an expanding one. The hole where it went in front, well below where the belt would have been, just below the right-hand pocket of the tunic, was almost microscopic. But at the back, almost exactly where his backbone would have been, there was quite a large rent. The underthings he was wearing at the time had evidently had to be destroyed, but they sent back a khaki waistcoat or vest, which was dark and stiff with blood, and a pair of breeches also in the same state, which had been slit open at the top by someone in a great hurry, probably the doctor, in haste to get at the wound. Even the tabs of his braces were blood-stained. He must have fallen on his back, as in every case, the back of his clothes were much more stained and muddy than the front. The charnel house smell seemed to grow stronger and stronger till it pervaded the room and obliterated everything else. Finally, Mrs. Layton said, "Take those clothes away into the kitchen and don't let me see them again. I must either burn or bury them. They smell of death. They are not Ronan. They seem to distract from his memory and spoil his glamour. I won't have anything to do with them any more."
In 1917, the war entered its fourth year. 1917 would bring with it the Russian Revolution, America's entry into the war. All the while, life and death battles were continuing both on land and at sea. On the Western Front, the main battles fought were the Battle of Arras and the Battle of Third Ypres, better known as the Battle of Passchendaele. As these major events unfolded, individual lives continued to be lived and lost. And as the years unfolded, many of those who died were also forgotten. While the main focus of the Western Front Association is to study the battles and campaigns that took place on the Western Front, we're also interested in the individual stories and stories of people who fought in those campaigns. During the course of conducting research on the wartime service of her granduncle, branch member Rachel Abraham made an unexpected discovery, which we shall now tell you about.
I first heard of Major Edward Charles Randolph Kilkelly, MC, in the spring of this year, while I was conducting research on my granduncle, Sergeant Miles Abraham. I discovered that a book of letters from Kilkelly to his family, published in 1918, was in the National Library. As Kilkelly had served in the same unit as my granduncle, I was initially drawn to Kilkelly for the insights I would glean regarding Miles. Apparently, the book had never been taken out before, and I wondered what I might find. On July 20th, I collected a small, frayed, leather-bound book and made my way to the reading room. As I read the preface, I learned that it had been some consolation to his mother to put them together. My heart went out to this grieving woman. Reading Edward's letters, I was drawn into his personal experience of the war. I would like to take the opportunity to share them with you now. Edward was born in 1895 into a military family with English and Irish connections. In January 1914, he was accepted into the Royal Military Academy in Woolwich and was assigned to the Royal Artillery. He was at the academy when war broke out and felt it would be a short, successful battle for Britain. If one can believe the newspapers, it seems as if the war is going very successfully for us, but I am afraid we will not get a show. After receiving his commission, he was sent initially to Ireland, then on to France in February 1915. By March, he was on the Western Front, and letters soon made their way home. I dare say you have read about the latest German effort, asphyxiating gases. It is some beastly stuff. Makes tears run out of your eyes. I think it is a pretty feeble way of fighting. News of what occurred on other fronts also got through to Edward. So, Italy is going to join in. This is quite the most extraordinary cosmopolitan war. When you think of all the various nationalities and tribes involved, it really is a world war. Of course, the original cause has long been forgotten. On the 25th of May 1915, Edward was badly wounded. He was sent home to convalesce, only returning to France in March 1916. This time he served in the 39th Division, as did my granduncle Miles. While Edward felt the 1916 Rising had been a wretched show, he was also unimpressed with what he perceived as sensationalism in England. What rot people talk about hearing the guns. It's too pathetic. Why, on many occasions there is not a sound for hours, except an occasional ping from a rifle. However, sadly, as this next extract suggests, shooting at humans became the norm after a time. Rather a funny thing happened yesterday. I saw a Boche get out of a support trench and stroll along in front of his wire with his hands in his pockets. I got the gun laid onto him with shrapnel. I fired and missed him. When he heard the shriek of the shell, he lay down, then ran back to his own trench at a terrific speed. We were so convulsed with laughter that we could not get the second round off in time. It is great fun sniping with a gun. In September 1916, Edward was promoted to captain. In January 1917, he was awarded the Military Cross, a decoration awarded to his battery. He was transferred within the division and also made acting major. In February 1917, Kilkelly was injured again, this time to his leg. He played down this and further wounds received, claiming, for example, that he had managed to stop a shrapnel bullet by his arm. Despite his injuries, Edward perceived a long military career ahead of him. He often spoke about his life after the war, which sadly was not to be. The last letter he ever wrote home was on the 21st of June 1917. Major Edward Charles Randolph Kilkelly MC was killed in action at Ypres on the 26th of June 1917. He was 21 years and 7 months old. A single shell hit and killed him, and apparently his death was instantaneous. His remains were only found at nightfall near the guns. Upon his death, letters of condolence were received by the family, including Lieutenant Colonel C.H. Kilner, commanding officer of the 186th, who wrote, "His success as a battery commander at his age has been a constant source of wonder to me. I can only attribute it to his personality and character and that gift of command that one meets once or twice in a lifetime. His whole life and bearing out here has been a high example to every one of us." Edward was buried in the military cemetery at Poppering, Belgium, on the 26th of June 1917. I uncovered Edward's letters just a week before members of the Cork branch of the Western Front Association went on a tour of the front, organised by branch member Ross Glennon. On the 27th of July 2013, he was remembered by the group in a small ceremony at his graveside. And so, having compiled some of the letters for you here tonight, I hope I have managed to remember just one of the lives of soldiers who lived and died during the tumultuous events of 1917, lest we forget. Thank you.
After America entered the war in 1917, many Irishmen lived in the States, volunteered or were conscripted into the US Army. One Cork man who went to the Army was Daniel Buckley from Boherbue, County Cork. His life story is fascinating, and here to tell it, dressed in the uniform of an American soldier, is Great War reenactor Kieran Kerwin.
Daniel Buckley was born in the village of Boherbui on the 28th of September 1890. He was the son of a baker, Daniel Buckley Sr. and Abigail Sullivan. In 1906, the family moved to King Williamstown, now Ballydesmond, and in 1912, Daniel and some of his friends decided to emigrate to America. They booked a passage on the White Star liner RMS Titanic and boarded that ship at Queenstown. At 11:40 p.m. on the 14th of April 1912, the Titanic struck an iceberg, buckling the plates below the waterline. The ship took just 2 hours and 40 minutes to sink. Daniel was asleep in his bunk at the time of the impact. He was awoken by the noise as the iceberg grated along the hull. He jumped out of bed to find the deck already dampening under his bare feet. When he tried to wake his friends, they told him to go back to sleep. Fortunately, he ignored this advice and managed to make his way onto the deck and into one of the lifeboats. He made it safely to New York and was given a $100 relief grant from the Red Cross and was the only Irish witness to give evidence to the US Senate inquiry into the disaster. In the years that followed, Daniel Buckley worked in a variety of jobs, including hotel porter and waiter. After America entered the war, he joined the US Army and became a private in the 165th Infantry Regiment. He fought on the Western Front, where he was wounded in April 1918. On October 15th, shortly after returning to duty, the luck that enabled Daniel Buckley to escape the Titanic finally ran out. He was shot dead by a German sniper while trying to rescue a wounded comrade on the Meuse-Argonne section of the line. He was 28 years old when he was killed, and the war had less than a month to run. Private Daniel Buckley was initially buried in France, but in 1922 his remains were returned to Ireland and were buried in Ballydesmond Cemetery, where Daniel Buckley continues to rest in peace today. One of hundreds of Irishmen who lost their lives while fighting with the American Armed Forces. Tonight we remember Daniel Buckley and all the Irishmen who died fighting in the Great War with the United States Armed Forces.
Tonight we do remember Daniel Buckley. But the Western Front Association also remembers those from all countries who died in the Great War. And to tell an individual story of a German soldier, we have Mr. Dirk Herberich.
Good evening. My name is Dirk Herberich. I want to introduce you to my great-grandfather, Michael Gregor Herberich, who fought on the German side during the Great War. Opa Michel, Grandpa Michael, as he is still lovingly remembered in our family, was born in 1881 in Langford, a village just about 100 kilometers away from Frankfurt. As the oldest male sibling, he inherited the family farm in 1904 when his father passed away. He married in 1908, and by the time the First World War broke out, he had 4 children. When he was conscribed to serve Kaiser and Fatherland in 1914, his interests were very similar probably to most of the fellow farmers. No matter which of the opposing sides of the war they had to fight for. As I know from the stories of my granduncle, from my aunts and from my uncles, his main interests were with his family and the farm. To him, the war was an unnecessary but unavoidable evil that he had to master as unscathed as possible. After being called for duty in 1914, it did only take until January 1915 until he found himself as a medic at the Western Front in northern France. He first was stationed in Tourcoing, then in Douai, and his last place of action was Mons in Belgium. Opa Michel was one of the lucky survivors of the Great War, and he was allowed to return home to his farm and to his family on the 12th of November 1918 due to the German demobilization. When Opa Michel returned home, he took up honorary offices as a commander of the local fire brigade and as the village treasurer of Langford. In 1933, he was ousted from office as he was opposed to the Nazi regime and as he refused to join the NSDAP. His advanced age spared my great-grandfather from active participation in any Second World War battles. In 1946, when peace returned to our village, my great-grandfather was put into office as the second mayor of our village, as he was trusted by the US allies that he has never been a Nazi. He retired from office in 1948, when the first free elections were taking place in our village. 4 years later, on the 25th of June 1952, Opa Michel passed away peacefully at home. During the Great War, my great-grandfather lost his 10-year younger stepbrother, Franz Julius. Uncle Franz fell near Souchez in 1915. He also had to mourn the loss of his son Karl, who fell in 1944 near Șapatok in Romania. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that story, Dirk. Tonight, we also remember the honourable men, like Dirk's great-grandfather, who fought and died fighting for the Central Powers during the Great War. And it is in memory of them and all the servicemen, like Edward Kilkelly and the others that we've heard about tonight. Requiem for a Soldier.
That was the Barrack Street Band's rendition of Requiem for a Soldier. During the night, we've heard about individuals who lost their lives in the war. However, it is important to remember that some families suffered more than one loss. Here to tell us about the Sheehan family of Kanturk and the enormous sacrifice they made is Desmond Daly.
Tonight I'm going to talk about the service and sacrifice made by two generations of the Sheehan family from Cork during the Great War. First, I'd like to talk about Daniel Desmond Sheehan Sr., or DD as he was known. DD was born in May 1873. He was a Nationalist Member of Parliament from Mid-Cork from 1901 to 1918. He entered politics because of what happened to his own family during the land wars of the 1880s, when they were evicted from their farm near Kanturk. During his career, DD was responsible for the creation of the 40,000 cottages, each on an acre of land, locally referred to as Sheehan's cottages. Also, he was responsible for the Blarney Model Village. He was a barrister, journalist and author, and in 1909 he became General Secretary of the All for Ireland League, a non-sectarian political party which was founded by William O'Brien. It had 5 MPs from Munster. One of the fundamental principles and policies of the League was their belief that Home Rule had to be won with the consent of the Northern Protestant population. The party stood for 3 C's: conference, conciliation and consent. His Ireland was an inclusive Ireland, an Ireland that was not determined by any particular political philosophy, and he passionately believed in Irish self-determination. In September 1914, Home Rule was placed on the statute books, but with the outbreak of the Great War was suspended for the duration of the conflict. Believing the war to be just and a means of achieving Home Rule for all of Ireland, DD gave his enthusiastic support to William O'Brien's call for Irishmen to enlist in the British Army. Not alone was he involved in the organisation of 3 voluntary recruiting campaigns in Cork, Clare and Limerick, but he was one of the 5 Irish nationalist MPs who led by example. He joined the British Army, himself becoming a member of the Royal Munster Fusiliers. He was largely responsible for raising the 9th Battalion of that regiment. In July 1915, he was promoted captain and given command of a company. He saw action on the Western Front, where he served in the Loos Salient in France under the Irish General William Hickey. However, due to ill health, he was transferred to the 3rd Munster Battalion, where he served as an instructor. He was frequently hospitalised, and in January 1918 he retired from the army with the honorary rank of captain. After the war, DD was awarded with the 1914-15 Star, the British War Medal, the Victory Medal and the Silver War Badge. He spent the rest of his life focusing, after the war, on labour issues both at home and abroad. 3 of DD's sons also served during the Great War. In 1915, at the age of 16, Michael J. Sheehan was the youngest commissioned officer on the Western Front. Though twice wounded, he survived and later became a brigadier general and served in Burma with the Indian Air Force during the Second World War. Daniel J. Sheehan, 2nd Lieutenant, joined the Royal Flying Air Corps and was shot down on the 10th of May 1917. That was the 22nd victory of the younger brother of the famous Red Baron, Lothar von Richthofen. On the 1st of October 1918, near the end of the war, 2nd Lieutenant Martin J. Sheehan of the Royal Flying Air Corps was also killed in action. DD's daughter, Eileen, who worked as a voluntary aid detachment nurse and ambulance driver, was severely wounded and disabled for the rest of her life. DD's brother, Private John Sheehan, also suffered severe wounds while serving with the Irish Guards. Finally, Dee Dee's brother-in-law, Sergeant Robert O'Connor of the Leinster Regiment, was killed in action on the 31st of July 1917 during the Battle of Passchendaele. The families will always remember the service and sacrifice made by members of the Sheehan and O'Connor families to their country and a cause they passionately believed in. Tonight we remember and salute them and all who fell in that war. We are particularly grateful to members of the Cork branch of the Western Front Association for placing a small memorial at the grave of Daniel Sheehan during a recent trip they made to the Western Front.
The two Sheehan brothers were not the only Irishmen to lose their lives by flying high in the skies above the battlefields of the Great War. David Ryan, a member of the staff of the Triskell Art Centre, will now remember these men by reading the poem "An Irish Airman Foresees His Death" by William Butler Yeats.
An Irish Airman foresees his death by William Butler Yeats. I know that I shall meet my face somewhere among the clouds above. Those that I fight, I do not hate. Those that I guard, I do not love. My country is Clontarf's cross, my countrymen, Clontarf's poor. No likely end will bring them loss, or leave them happier than before. Nor law, nor duty bade me fight, nor public men, nor cheering crowds. A lonely impulse of delight drove to this tumult in the clouds. I balanced all, brought all to mind. The years to come seem wasted breath. A wasted breath, the year behind, in balance with this life, this death.
The Great War was a conflict that saw the introduction of what can only be called industrial slaughter. It lasted 4 years and 106 days. But finally, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the guns fell silent on the Western Front, and the war came to an end. During the war, many Cork servicemen from Cork who had been wounded in battle were discharged from the service. After the war ended, they were joined by thousands of others who were demobilised. When these men returned home, they faced unemployment, poverty, and a lack of suitable housing. Hundreds were horribly disfigured or were missing limbs, and countless others were suffering from what today is known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Many of these men went on to fight for New Ireland. Others immigrated in search of work, and more just stayed at home and tried their best to rebuild their shattered lives. Other people who had been forever changed by the war were the parents, widows, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, and friends of those who had died in the conflict. All of these people suffered an unimaginable loss, and many would carry their grief with them for the rest of their lives. A small few who had the money to do so managed to visit the cemetery where their loved one was buried, or the memorial that contained his name. The vast majority, however, never had the opportunity to do so, and all they had to comfort them was their memories. The only consolation many people had here in Cork was that in 1925 the Cork Independent Ex-Servicemen's Club erected a memorial here in the city to those who fell. For the final piece of music, the Barrack Street Band will now play a tune called Erosio, to remember all those we heard about here tonight, and all those who fought and died in the war. And as we remember them, we should remind ourselves of the huge amount of pain and suffering brought about by war. And going forward, it would be our wish that nations will always endeavour to use peaceful means to resolve their differences. Finished, but just before we do, I'd like to invite our Deputy Lord Mayor on stage to say a few words.
Thank you, Jerry. And this is a very solemn evening. I'd like to pay tribute to yourself and the West Front Association for organising for me, which is a very touching and solemn evening here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I, like so many other Cork people, have been touched in an indirect way. My grandmother's brother, like so many other people lived in Ireland, served in the Great War and lost a limb while serving there, and returned to Ireland, I suppose, to pick up the pieces, like so many other people. And still to this day, it's a revolving conversation in our household, where my father reminds me of his great uncle returning with a false leg, and was one of the first people to have one up in Shandon Street. So, I'm like so many other Cork people, I have been touched. Over 16 million people lost their lives in the First World War. Over 20 million others were wounded. Of a number of approximately 4,000 servicemen who died fighting with the Allied forces had connections with Cork City and County. At tonight's event, which has been organised by the Western Front Association, and at other events over the weekend, we will remember those from our city and county who fell in that war. We will also remember the loved ones that left behind those servicemen who came home bearing horrific physical and mental scars. In terms of death, the First World War was the greatest tragedy to strike Cork City and County since the Great Famine. We will never know the names of all the people who died of hunger during the famine, but thanks to the work carried out by members of the Great Sacrifice Project and Jerry White, which was sponsored by Cork City DEC and Mr. Ted Owens, we know the names of addresses of about 4,000 servicemen with Cork connections who died in the First World War. We approach the centenary of the outbreak of the First World War. It is important that we remember the great sacrifice made by those who fell in the war. Today, the nations face each other across the trenches of the Western Front and in Gallipoli, and in the jungles of Africa, and the deserts of the Middle East, and on the high seas at peace. And therefore it is fitting that we remember the people from all those countries who died in the supposed war to end all wars. Ireland's involvement in the war has been debated and examined by historians since the conflict ended. It is only right that this is done because it's important that we learn from our history. The one thing we can learn from tonight's events is the pain and suffering that has been caused by war. If that memory serves to remind us of the need to live together in peace, then perhaps the sacrifice made by those who remember here tonight will have not been gone in vain. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. Finally tonight, we thought it would be fitting to pay a final salute to those who fell in the Great War in a manner that they themselves would have been familiar with when they were serving. So in that regard, Eddie Casey will play a Piper's Lament, and he will be followed by Billy O'Callaghan from the Barrack Street Band, who will play the last post in Ravelli. Members of the Irish Great War Society will form an honour guard for this ceremony.
Stop. And. Oh yeah. Go to center. Quick. March.
Ladies and gentlemen, that brings our evening of remembrance to an end. But before we go, there are a couple of people I have to thank, without whose help tonight couldn't have taken place. First of all, Ross Lennon, the Vice Chairman of the Cork and Western Front Association, who has worked tremendously hard over the last 2 weeks with me putting this whole event together. How we managed to stay French during that time was actually a miracle, but we managed. And also Adrian Foley, who's our Secretary and a Commemorations Officer, has done a tremendous amount of work as well, putting everything together, the music side of things. And I have to thank everyone who had to put up with us during that last 3 weeks, because we probably weren't blessed to be around during that time. I want to thank all those who made contributions on stage, to Rachel for operating the PowerPoint slide, our good friends in the Irish Great War Society for the fantastic display that you saw as you came in, and which I would urge you to visit and to look at before you leave here tonight. To Tony Sheen and David Ryan and all the staff at the Triskell Art Centre for giving us this venue, which I think you'll all agree is fantastically suited for an evening such as this. I want to also thank each and every one of you for coming here tonight. I think what we've done here tonight was a unique act of remembrance, and it wouldn't be the occasion it is without your support. Finally, I want to thank the Barrett Street Band under the back of Brian Prendergast and Billy. And just, you heard about the book, The Great Sacrifice, that the Deputy Lord Mayor mentions. So just as a small token of our gratitude, I'd like to make a presentation of that book, both to Brian and Billy, like I said, as a small token of gratitude and for the assistance they gave here tonight. Barrett Street Bands also had a personal connection. They lost a number of people, members in the Great War, and I think they had the distinct honour of accompanying one of our previous Lord Mayors down and marching through the men in gaze. Also proud tonight is Niamh O'Sullivan, an amazing young lady. Niamh, where are you? My company on stage. Performed at our first evening Remembrance, and I have to say she actually performed on her 18th birthday. This year she missed that birthday by one night. So tomorrow she'll be celebrating her 19th birthday. So as a small token of our gratitude and as a way of birthday wishes, we might like to make this small presentation. Niamh is currently studying music in Dublin, but I have no doubt that she's a singer that we'll be hearing a lot about in the future. Just like I said earlier on, tonight's proceeds will be going towards the Triskell Art Centre, towards Cork Penny Dinners, one of Cork's oldest charities. A number of members of the charity are here with us tonight, including the leading lady, Rini Toomey, she's sitting there in the audience. As you visit the exhibition, you'll also see a couple of donation boxes. And like I said, what we do, we're a non-profit making organisation, but we do need a few bob to keep ourselves on the road and to enable us to put on events like tonight, take events like tonight's evening Remembrance and our Remembrance service tomorrow. It does cost a few bob, so if you have any few spare copies, for ourselves in the Triskell Art Centre, I'd ask you to throw them to the donation box. I'd also like you, if you can, to take part or to be at the War Memorial tomorrow morning for our own service of remembrance. If you will, you'll be more than welcome to attend. And if you had somebody who lost somebody in the war, to lay a floral tribute, or just to say a prayer, or just to be there to remember that loss. Those who would like to attend, I'd ask them to be there at 10:30 in the morning. The Lord Mayor will be there, the County Mayor will have members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of veterans organisations, regimental associations, and of our own defence forces. So again, each and every one of you will be welcome to attend. Just once more, thank you for your attendance tonight. You have been a fantastic audience, and thank you for your continued support. Now, I invite you all to stand for our national anthem.